Good afternoon, everyone. I am Michael Steelman, Director of Alumni Career Management and Professional Networks at William & Mary. I'm truly delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, Finding Your Passion. Today's webinar is part of a new William & Mary webinar series and is made possible by the support of the William & Mary Alumni Association. As we seek to provide relevant programming for your lifelong commitment to our alumni, we welcome any feedback and ideas to make this a valuable resource for you. Today's presentation is being recorded, and we will notify registrants once the recording is available. Just a few housekeeping items before I introduce our guest presenter today. It's important to note that if you are experiencing any audio or video difficulties today throughout the presentation, please call the Adobe Connect technical support number at 1-800-422-3623. Also, questions are welcome throughout today's presentation. Our presenter will answer as many questions as time will allow at the end of her presentation. You can just go ahead and submit your questions by typing in the box on the right of the screen. Throughout the webinar, I will monitor them and facilitate Q&A at the end of her presentation. Just a few more housekeeping items. You should have received a worksheet that Kathy provided. If you have not received it for some reason, I just put it on the screen. You can go ahead and download that using the download the file. It should open up a Word document. Please use that throughout today's presentation. Kathy will reference that. Additionally, if you go to full screen mode at any point today throughout the presentation, you're welcome to do so, but please keep in mind that if you, Kathy will have a lot of polls throughout the presentation. I urge you to go off of the full screen mode to be able to participate in those polls and short answer questions. Great. Well, now without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest presenter today.
Hi and welcome. I'm so excited to be able to do this presentation today. I love the topic of finding your passion. I've known what it's like to be working in accordance with passion, and I know what it's like to not be working in accordance with passion and how our passions can change over time. So I want to share what I know and what I found out in my work, both as a consultant and a coach. So I want to start with, did you choose your work or did it choose you? Most of us drift into an occupation. We make choices based on options presented versus being intentional. Sometimes we're lucky enough to fall into a perfect fit, but that may not continue to be a perfect fit throughout our entire work career. In the end, most of us don't like what we do. 2/3 of adults say they're disengaged with work. So I want to start with our first polling question, and this is a multiple choice. So, and as you can see, we'll be able to see your answers over time, and it looks like most people are somewhat engaged at work, but very few are very engaged, and some people are not engaged at all. If we're disengaged, we feel disconnected from our authentic selves. We're lost, sidetracked, or stuck. We aren't authentic. We're trying to be something other than who we are. We check the meaningful part of ourselves at the office door. And as a result, we're not happy in our work. We think the very idea of happiness in work is crazy. We have the idea that work is drudgery. Our real purpose behind working is to earn enough money to enjoy ourselves outside of work. It doesn't have to be that way. As Studs Terkel wrote, we're looking for daily meaning as well as daily bread, for a sort of life rather than a Monday through Friday sort of dying. Well, we definitely don't want to have a Monday through Friday sort of dying. So ask yourselves, do you experience true joy at work? Are you your authentic self? Are you being creative? I'm sure you've heard the analogy of 3 bricklayers building a cathedral. The first one when asked what he was doing, said, "I'm laying bricks." The second one said, "I'm building a building." And the third one said, "I'm creating something to the glory of God." Well, and we can all tell the differences between how each one of those people viewed what they were doing. The first one, it was drudgery. The second one had something of the big picture, but not really. And the third one was totally engaged and feeling part of the big picture and the bigger scheme of things. Amy Wozniewski, a professor at Yale, classifies our feelings about our jobs as a job, just a necessity of life, a career, a stepping stone to other jobs, or a calling, one of the most important things of my life. In a calling, my work makes the world a better place. Some of it, how we feel about our jobs, is based upon how we measure success as a person, both for ourselves and for our careers. We may think that success is tied to money, prestige, promotions, etc. But when we really reflect upon things, it's relationships rather than money that is most important to us. If we fail to discover our calling or work in a way disconnected with passions and purpose, eventually we start to ask questions. Who am I? Who am I? What was I meant to do? What would make me truly happy? How have I affected the world? What do I want my life to have been about? Has my life made a difference on something that I'm concerned about? We want to count for passions. We want our work to count for something and express that through our passions and values. We want work to have a greater meaning, to count for something. When we consider our work and even our legacy, we want to have made a difference and to have positively affected the world. We worry that our lives won't count as meaningful and we could have done more to leave a distinctive mark. If we want to truly live, then we have to be who we are. When we're operating connected to passion and purpose, our energy and joy is limitless. Hours fly by and work doesn't seem like work. When we're doing work we're passionate about, we tend to be more loving, generous, committed to personal and professional development. We feel our lives are meaningful and we're more creative. So today we're going to talk about our passions and finding our current purpose for our lives. To live and work authentically and connected to our passion, we need to figure out how to make a living based on who we uniquely are, connected who we are to what we do. We'll be talking about how to find that passion and connect it to our work in a way that is feasible and makes us feel fulfilled, either within our current role or a new one. So to go through what we're going to talk about today, we're first going to reflect on who we are and where we are, how we feel right now, and perhaps being stuck. We're briefly going to reflect upon our environment, and then we're going to talk about components for feeling more engaged at work and working more on passion and purpose. And then we're going to talk about next steps. First of all, brainstorming for our future, reframing your job, considering experimenting with something completely new and different, and changing our narrative before we look forward to our next webinar in August. I would note that in your worksheet, there's a number of questions and exercises, some of which you'll have time to do on this call, but most of which require self-reflection outside of this call. You'll get the most out of this work if you're really honest with yourself and really dig into yourself and think about that self-reflection. Many of us once felt energized by our career, but now we're in a malaise. We feel stuck and in the doldrums. It happens to everyone. It's a very natural feeling at some point in our career. Everybody feels this disconnectedness. Carl Jung, in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, wrote, "About a third of my cases are suffering from no clinically defined neuroses, but from the senselessness and emptiness of their lives." He continues, "The ordinary expression for the situation is I'm stuck." The book Working Identity, which is a great book for rediscovering where you should go and changing your career, and is referenced in the last page of your reference material, has a great quote that I use: "It's always ugly in the middle." And that's where we feel, and we're feeling this middle passage, disconnected from our past, maybe slightly connected to it, but not connected to our future, but just stuck here, wandering around, not knowing how to get out of it. Multiple things contribute to our being stuck. Habit, doing things for the wrong reasons, for money, promotions, an outdated version of success, things we used to want but don't want anymore. Inertia, an outdated version of ourselves. Fear of failure, risk, or fear of the future. And fear of moving out of our comfort zone. We're comfortable We may not like what we do, but we know how to do it, and the future is scary. Um, a story based upon our past history and voices in our heads, actual and external barriers, and being tied to old networks or contexts which are reinforcing our assumptions about ourselves. We also feel stuck because we're not using our strengths and what we're doing is not tied to our passions. So I want to ask you in a polling question, this is a short answer polling question, why do you think you're stuck? And just, you won't see the results, but I can. And while you're answering that question and typing in why you think you're stuck, I want to reflect basically about our environment. The environment which we work can color how we perceive how satisfied we are with what we're doing. Environmental preferences are personal. What works for one person may not work for another. We may be in an environment that's characterized by a command and control environment. We may like structured and we're in an unstructured environment or vice versa. We may feel that we're not supported in what we are doing. Our environment needs to be consistent with what we value. How much of your satisfaction with your career is colored by your environment? If your environment is inconsistent with your needs or value, what are you going to do about it? We're not going to talk much about environment, but you need to explore your current situation to determine how much of you feel about your career is a product of not being connected to your passion and how much of it is your current environment. In other words, if you could change your environment to one more consistent with you, your preferences and values, could you be more consistent, more connected to your passions? And there is a lot of answers here. Let me read some. Some people say they love what they do. And somebody just wrote that I don't like the environment or people. Well, that's one of the points that we need to reflect on. Is it feeling stuck because of our passions um, or the environment itself? Fear of the future, um, tired to the old habits, not knowing where to go next, um, being in a position that's not meaningful for me, so being disconnected for things I do, being connected to something that we feel the risk of moving into the future. Our current job are things that we don't want to leave. Um, Needing a new challenge, finding a new path, lack of innovation. There's a lot of great answers. So you all are really engaged, working in a toxic environment. Again, that environment can really be what's driving how we feel about things. Not knowing what career paths are open to me, inertia, too much work, no interest in work, too many choices. So a number of reasons of why we feel stuck. So let's start to talk about how we can feel connected to our work. The first thing we want to consider is our unique gifts, our strengths. Frequently, we don't know what our strengths are because we've been focused on our weaknesses rather than our strengths. Think about the performance reviews that you've been doing, that they tell you always to work on weaknesses, and we don't think about our strengths. We do things and we're best at what we enjoy most. So do you know your strengths, what you're really good at, what you like doing most? One way of thinking of exploring that is to ask some colleagues. The people who know us know what we do well, and they know what they come to us for. Think of it almost as your brand, your personal brand. It's what you're known for. There's a great article in the reference material attached to this worksheet by Laura Roberts et al. Called How to Play for Your Strengths. And it talks about how to use your colleagues to give you feedback to know what your strengths really are. Now, some of us are good at things we're not interested in or truly enjoy, and that's one reason why we feel trapped or stuck. We have to enjoy what we're doing along with what we're good at. And that is a little bit beyond the scope of how to navigate and get out of that situation is beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today. But what we are going to talk about today a little bit later is reframing what we do so that we can be more energized by our current job. So think about it. Does your work give you an opportunity to use your unique gifts, what you're really good at and what you enjoy doing? Does it let you encourage you to do what you most enjoy doing? What do you really feel most alive when you're doing it? When was the last time you were so absorbed in what you were doing that you lost all track of time? This situation is called flow. Think about how that felt. You were energized and engaged. Flow is characterized by performing at very high levels of challenge and feeling absolutely effortless. So I want you to first of all think about the last time you experienced flow. What were you doing? And more importantly, what was it about what you were doing that made it so satisfying? And then when you're reflecting upon this later on your worksheet, think about other times you've experienced flow and ask yourself the same questions. What was it you were doing? And more importantly, what was it about you were doing that made it so satisfying? And look for some common threads. We've all been in situations where it seemed absolutely ridiculously hard. And yet, when we got into it, it was so effortless and amazing. And we reflect upon it afterwards where we were so energized and we can't believe we were actually able to achieve what we uh, achieved when looking from the outside, it seemed impossible. That's a situation where we were in flow. And we want to really identify that, explore that, and perhaps recapture that. So I've got another polling question. And I wanted you to reflect on when you were last in flow. I experienced it frequently. I've experienced it this month. I experienced it infrequently in my current role. I've experienced it in the past, but not in my current role, or I've never experienced it. And it looks like most of you are either experiencing it this month or you experience it infrequently in a current role or you experienced it in the past but not in my current role. So all of you are familiar with the experience of flow. It's just maybe not as frequently as you would like and maybe not in your current career or current role. So let's move on to thinking about passion. There's a great quote in the book in one of the books that's on your reference material by Suzanne Braun Levine. When ignited, whether it's a pilot light or a burning light, a passion illuminates the inner recesses of who we are. Whether its outlet is a hobby or a major commitment, passion is about letting go. No wonder it engenders fear. Even the tiniest little passion is an authentic expression of curiosity about something out there in the world that comes from in here in each one of us. And Richard later wrote, "Our world is incomplete until each one of us discovers what moves us. No other person can hear our music calling. We must listen and act on it for ourselves." Passion energizes us about what we're doing. People are more satisfied on the job when it's tied to their personal interests. We perform better when we're interested than when we're not. Nobody works well at doing something they don't find interesting. I was lucky enough to see the movie Music of Strangers a couple weeks ago, which is the story of Yo-Yo Ma and the Silk Road Project. And I was struck because I was working on this workshop, how much that movie and the Silk Road Project is about passion and a purpose. And it started with something that Leonard Bernstein told a master class in the early 70s that at Harvard, where Yo-Yo Ma was attending, that started his whole idea about the need and how music can connect different cultures around the world. And yet here is something that's grown from a very small idea back in the 70s to something that has connected with him throughout his life and has created an amazing opportunity for music connection, and education around the world. So how do we find our passion? Most of us are not going to have something that aha moment when we were in college that's going to create the Silk Road project. But we all have ways of connecting to our passions. First of all, we have to listen to ourselves. We have to create the circumstance to make the passion possible. The idea that you're going to fall in love with something very quickly, just like in romance, it's a myth. We have to really dig into what we're doing. And it may be that things that seem uninteresting and superficial, once you start doing them, you might realize there's so many aspects to what you're doing. Passion for what you're doing is a little bit about discovery, a lot about development, and then it takes a lifetime of effort. Interests are not just generated by introspection. We have to be out there interacting with others, and we have to conduct some experimentation. We have to learn things and have our interests triggered over and over again. We also need a village. We need a crew around us to encourage us and give us stimulation. All of these encounters re-trigger our interest again and again. So how do we start? We have to pay attention to feeling and listening to our inner voices. Did you ever get the sense that you're doing the right thing? You were in the right place doing the right thing. When that happens, what were you doing? Start to mine those experiences to start to understand what drives you. There's a lot of questions in your materials. So use these to start to think about what your passion is. What makes you get up in the morning? What makes your good days good and your bad days bad? What do you like to think about? Where does your mind wander? What do you really care about? What matters most to you? How do you enjoy spending your time? On the contrary, what do I find that is absolutely unbearable? What do I do or have done that has most energized me? And what do I think is worth doing in the world? What am I constantly thinking and talking to people about? Problems that need solving. If you had only 1 year to live, how would you like to spend it? So we've got another polling question. What makes you get up in the morning? And while you're answering that, I want to reflect on something. I do a workshop on Find Your Passions face-to-face a lot, and I did one last week. When I ask people what they're passionate about, their faces change. Their faces absolutely light up. And that passion, that lighting up, actually changes your brain chemistry. And there's a lot written on neuropsychology on how having that passion and being energized in how we feel changes the hormones and enzymes in our brain and actually makes us feel happier. I encourage you to read Rick Hanson's book, Hardwiring Happiness, to really understand how important being passionate about something and how important that is to being happy and to our overall well-being. So we've got some answers here. A lot of times it's our relationships with family and friends, not necessarily jobs. Meeting new people, knowing something out there that I'm doing something better, that I'm making a difference, being challenged, exercise, community. Again, relationships. Relationships mean an awful lot to a lot of us. Meeting new people, another relationship point. So a lot of those sorts of things really are tied to what we're passionate about. So start to think about that and as a sense of things we like to connect to. And then I want to move on to purpose. We've identified what we're good at and what we're passionate about, and now we want to connect that to something that's greater than ourselves, which is our purpose. Our well-being and quality of life depends on finding greater wholeness in life. Our life has to have more meaning when we're tied to what we value. So we're answering the question, what am I meant to be and why am I here? Humans seek meaning. Purpose is the intent to contribute to the well-being of others. It pays dividends to others. What we do matters to people other than ourselves. It's a profound commitment to a compelling expectation. It's the sum of your yearnings for what you may become or devote your life to becoming. Our purpose frequently ties our gifts and passions to something larger than ourselves, benefiting others. It connects to other people and to a bigger picture. Having a clear purpose in life, a clear reason to get up in the morning, is essential for growing whole. It inspires the activities of our lives. It generates commitment beyond our daily needs to the most lofty reaches of our mind and soul. It provides focus for our essential things today and a vision of the future we want to enjoy. It provides a general direction of our lives and helps us prioritize things day to day. We want to feel connected to our purpose at all times. We know, and we've all had situations where circumstances caused us to act counter to our purpose, and we feel miserable. Our purpose can change over time, and recognize that what is important to us, of paramount importance at one point in our lives, may be different later because of different life circumstances or different facets in our lives. What's important to us in our 20s and 30s is not important to us in our 50s and 60s. No one has the same sense of purpose for an entire life. So you need to also remember that when you're thinking about what your purpose is, because I've been in workshops where people thought they had a purpose, but it really had become drudgery. And in that case, it's no longer their purpose, and part of their problem is hanging on to our old purpose. Your purpose is not the same as goals. It's a greater focus than goals. It's an expression of your current ultimate concerns. It comes from your basic belief system. It doesn't have to be new. It doesn't have to be a grand idea, and it doesn't have to be tied to expertise. It's just what's important to do. But it's not what you're busy at. Because remember, as Henry David Thoreau wrote, ants are always busy, and we want to be tied to something more than just being busy. So I want you at some point to answer the question, why am I here? Creating your purpose statement. Imagine your life 15 years from now, and what is it that you want to have said about yourself? Your purpose may tie your passions to your job, your career, or your relations and interactions with others, either your organization, society as a whole. My purpose statement is connecting people to passion, inspiring others in the possibilities of creativity, helping others to grow, achieve their potential, find their passions, and connect and discover the humanity in us all. Now, I don't expect you during this workshop to actually write down your purpose statement, but I do encourage you to reflect on some of these questions and think about how you want your life to have lived and how knowing what your purpose can change how you look at work. By implementing our purpose, we align our energies with others, and it takes time to make that effort. So we're going to have to, once we know what our purpose is, to really think through how we spend our time going forward. So now that we've aligned our purpose, I want you to do some personal brainstorming. And this is, you're not going to have time to do that here, but I want you to do this afterwards. I want you to let your mind wander to your next chapter of your life, thinking of all your activities, the people you're connected to, and anything else of great importance to your life. Frequently, our ideas are tied to where we've been, and where we are is not necessarily viable for the future for a number of reasons. Technology is no longer right for you. The industry has changed. The profession has changed. We need to free ourselves from where we've been to take advantage to all new opportunities in our career. And we need to leave these preconceived ideas of ourselves on the side when we're doing this brainstorming. So I want you to give yourself permission to dream without editing yourself about money, time, or anything else. Too often we edit ourselves too early, and we have to remember that our best ideas come from other ideas. So start imagining your preferred future with yourself at your best. Think about a 5-year horizon, the next stage of your career. What will you be doing? How will you be doing it? Who will you be doing it with? Will this be tied to your passions? Will you do some sort of outrageous dream? Think back to what you've always wanted to do, what you wanted to do when you were younger. Do you have a dream to try a new kind of work? You can do this as a list, or you can do a mind map. And this illustration is to get you started on the whole idea of a mind map. Mind maps are a means of brainstorming to encourage the generation of ideas and to help us think creatively. They help us come up with new ideas. But the thing to remember is the further you get from the center of the map, the more hidden ideas you uncover. You, again, don't want to edit yourself. You want to just brainstorm and let yourself go. So to get started, you put your name in the middle of the page, and you might start with certain passions around your the center. You might want to start thinking about what you were doing one time when you felt totally engaged and connected to the world, when you felt really challenged, when you're in flow. What is it about what you're in flow? And use those as starting points to come up with new ideas and build your ideas on other ideas on other ideas. Keep moving from the center until the whole page is filled. And again, don't edit, because it's the building of ideas upon ideas that really help us generate new ideas about where we could go. And when you've done the whole thing, then look at your mind map and think about what really intrigues you and circle those with a colored pen or pencil and create a list. And when we create a list, we'll see what we want to explore, and this might become the start of the blueprint for our future. It's a starting point which we will turn into a plan, which we'll explore in our session in August. We're going to start to think about new steps. And when we do that, we need to look at what we visualized against our current life structures. We need to become practical at this point, but we don't want to become practical until we get to this point. And look at our life structures, external systems, etc. Does your vision align with them, or do you need to make some changes to account for your new vision? Or perhaps there might be some modifications of your vision to the marketplace. So you have many opportunities here after you've done your brainstorming with yourself. You could do a mini transition as your next step to regain the passion you had with what you're currently doing, restructuring your job, refocusing it, or changing your focus. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. You could do the same job, and it may be just the organization in a different so moving to a different organization, or a new job in the same. It may be the job itself in the organization or industry, or you may want to change completely. So to start, let's talk about staying within the same job. Looking at your same job from a different perspective may change how you see it. This is particularly true if we can't quit. We may be in a circumstance where we can't leave our job. So we want to think about reframing and modifying the perspective. Many people might have the same job. It's all about how you view it. How you see your work may be more important than the work itself. Think about how, in small but meaningful ways, you can change your current work to enhance its connection to your core values. So start by analyzing what once excited you about your job. Examine it and uncover opportunities for using your strengths or your passions that you haven't currently recognized. When you first came to work that first day, what really intrigued you? Which of your responsibilities provided you the best opportunity to express who you are? How could you change your job to be more consistent with what you do best and what you're interested in doing? How can you change it or modify it to connect it to your passion and purpose, to connect it to something greater than yourself? You could go from a job to a career to a calling, not by changing your occupation, but changing how you structure your occupation and change how you perceive it. So we've got another polling question here on how you would reframe your job. And Michael, if you'd open that. And while you do that, I'm going to talk about an article that's attached to in the reference material by Amy Worsnevsky and some others, Turn the Job You Have into the Job You Want, which I encourage all of you to take a look at. There's also a YouTube video which is referenced in the materials on job crafting. And what she does is talk about how to redefine your job to incorporate motives, your strengths, motives, and passions. Visualizing your job, mapping the elements, and reorganize them to better suit you. Start by thinking about um, the aspects of your job, your tasks, your relationships, and your perceptions. Changing with tasks, changing the boundaries to take on more or fewer tasks, expand or diminishing the scope, or change how things are performed. Or changing relationships, change the nature and extent of your interactions with other people. Or change how you think about the purpose of certain aspects of your job, or reframe the job as a whole. By being more engaged and satisfied, you'll have higher levels of performance and greater resilience. Reconfigure the building blocks of your job. Identify your motives, strengths, and passions which will keep you engaged, and change those building blocks to get a better allocation of time and energy. Think about it as you shape your job, not the reverse. So some of you have written in on how you would reframe your job. And changing relationships, enhancing opportunities to teach others. So there again, develop some specific resources. Look at opportunities and prioritize. Changing relationships, looking at relationships. Change how you view your work. And some of what you all have written sounds like a little bit of it is environment, and it may be that you need to be in a different environment. But let's assume that reframing your job is not the answer for you. And instead, let's assume you want to change your career. You want to start by exploring by experimenting. Experimenting is testing our possible selves, trying on new professional roles on a small scale. It provides the first step in taking our ideas and moving into our practical career search. Experience shows us that we rarely know what we need to change, as well as what is feasible and appealing at the beginning of our career transition, because our view is constrained by what we know. We need this new information, and we need to investigate our ideas to see if they're feasible. The process is very iterative, and as we explore, we recognize, question, and dismantle our assumptions. There are different types of experience. You might start experiments. You might start with some natural experiments to get the ball rolling, but quickly move to the exploratory phase where we're formulating hypotheses. We start with open-ended questions, and we do some activities to get things going. Then we'll formulate specific questions with hypotheses. With each experiment, we learn more. As knowledge builds up, we become clearer in what we want to build. Experimenting is important because it gets us out of that daydream phase. But note that prolonged experimentation can also be a defense mechanism against changing. From there, we'll get to the confirmatory stage where we're testing on preliminary conclusions. In doing any investigation, you want to keep your range of options open and have several experiments going at the same time. That way we can say, this works, this doesn't, this resonates, this doesn't. I like X better than Y. And we can experiment on alternative hypotheses. We also need to remember, and think about how we're evaluating our experiments. And we want to avoid having biases against our experiments. Biases that might say, gee, I know I want to do this. So this feedback I'm getting from this experiment, gee, if it undermines my perception that I must like doing this, I'm going to discount the feedback. We can't discount feedback. We have to look at all the feedback we receive dispassionately. And if it tells us something that, against something we have a predisposition, we need to accept that and move on. So after our discovery phase, whether reframing the job or experimenting in search of a new career, comes a lifelong development. Interest must be triggered again and again. We must seek out people who share our interests, find encouraging mentors, and our knowledge and expertise will grow along with our confidence and curiosity. deepening our interests, and finding a way to appreciate nuances. We need to practice because working in accordance with passion is characterized by a desire to do better, to grow, which is the opposite of being complacent. We need to be looking forward. We need to also look about our own narrative about ourselves. Our identity must be consistent with the stories we hear and tell ourselves about ourselves. The story we tell ourselves about our choices and actions form the basis for our identities. What stories do you tell yourself every day about your work? Are you making a living, contributing to the success of the organization, putting in time, supporting my family? The story you tell yourself makes that story come true. Again, it's your perception of what you're doing rather than what you're actually doing that colors how we see ourselves. We can affect real change in our personal and professional lives by changing the stories we tell ourselves. By rewriting the stories about what we do and who we are, we can reconceptualize our lives in a way that results in more happiness, success, and fulfillment. So think about your narrative and think about how you need to reframe it to make yourself more connected and happier. So moving forward, we've talked an awful lot about and crammed an awful lot of thoughts into this time period. Moving forward can be very scary. It requires courage to step out of our comfort zone. We're so steeped in our habits and routines. We know how to do what we're currently doing, even if it's no longer satisfying. It's far easier than venturing into the unknown. We're comfortable with our own ways and stick to it even though they don't work anymore. There's a parable in one of the books I have on your reference material about a woman swimming across a lake with a rock. As she struggles, the group of people gather on the shore and shout, "Drop the rock." However, she refuses. "I can't. It's mine." We hold on to things that keep us behind, even though they're, they're the reason for our struggles. Dropping those long-hold assumptions isn't easy. It's not a matter of just letting go. Usually we're dealing with a mixed bag of preferences, priorities, and habits. So we need to recognize what it is that is holding us back from trying new things. And I'm going to close by saying that by transitioning to our next workshop, which is going to be in August. Now that we found our passion, we want to be intentional about our career and development versus falling into things, considering only the options presented. Being intentional in creating our plan will be the subject of the webinar in August. And I want to close by saying that we've gone through an awful lot of ideas and self-reflection that I would want you to do, and we couldn't do that in the 42 minutes that I've spoken. But rather, I want you to take these ideas and really think about things. Think about what drives you, what makes you happy, what you do best, when you're most in flow, how you feel like when you're in flow, what you've most been passionate about, what really makes you happy, and what your overall purpose is, and then how you can bring that into your job that you currently have, whether it's your environment that's holding you back and whether that you can change your environment by moving to a new job, etc. Or do you need to start some experimentation to consider a new career? And Michael, I'll open it up to questions at this point.
Kathy, thank you so much from all of us participating today and those watching the recording. We really appreciate your expertise and look forward to the webinars later in August that you will also be presenting. So I'll move it on here. So keep in mind that if you do have questions, please do type them in the Q&A box. We have a few already, so I know that people were waiting a little bit to the conclusion, but I'm sure you have some questions knowing that you all participated so actively in the polls. But if we don't get to all of the questions in the time allotted, please do keep in touch with Kathy. There's contact information here about her website and her phone number that she's kindly provided. So I'm sure she'd love to hear from fellow members of the tribe and help all of you getting your steps. So first off, we have graduates of all different points in their life participating today. What advice or suggestions would you give someone more recent graduate, just embarking into their first official job and making sure that they align with their passions or test a bit of their alignment? What would you give?
I would say the first thing is to really be perceptive as you start working into what drives you and what energizes you, what your strengths are when you're most in flow. Find those circumstances where you really are in flow, where you're really energized and connected, and get an idea of what you're passionate about and what you have as your purpose for this time right now. And start to think about what you can do that connects that passion and really moves you in and finding a job that connects to that passion. I think our next webinar where we're talking about building a plan would also be really useful for new graduates because we're going to talk about building, enhancing our visibility, building relationships, connecting with others, etc.
Great, thank you. So another sort of life stage question with people with children, especially young children, in this particular situation, toddlers, and this individual is really concerned about the leaving a stable, financial stable job, but yet it's not as fulfilling as he or she would have liked.
Yeah.
Any anecdotes of how this has worked out for folks in similar situations that you've worked with?
Well, I would first of all make sure that it's not the environment that the environment isn't impacting how you've perceived the job. And if that's not the case, then I think really examine the potential of reframing the job and job crafting. And is there some way that currently you can become more satisfied in that job by re-looking at the job and changing some things about it. And at the same time, recognize that where you are now is not where you always have to be. And the process of trying to find our passion and find the perfect job for us in the future is not something you want to necessarily drop everything and move into, but rather it's something you want to start exploring over time. Hermione Ibarra's book, Working Identity, is a great reference for anybody who's thinking, well, at some point I want to be somewhere else and it's not here, because it's not something you do overnight. And it's more important to do that from a position where you're in a job and you're connected to you're financially somewhat secure, and you can start exploring different alternatives, what really intrigue you, and think about that as building gathering information and gathering building blocks for where you want to go into the future, where your children are a little older, and in many instances getting into that other job may be something that takes some additional skills, some additional education, etc. And it's something you want to test out. It's also, and I can't emphasize this enough, we look at what our possibilities are based upon what we know. We don't know what we don't know, but we think we know what we don't know, if that makes any sense. But once we get out there in the world and start to explore in fields that we're not working in currently, we encounter a whole new amount of information that provides us ideas of new possibilities and opportunities, etc. And until we start doing that exploratory phase of connecting with, just getting out there and trying to see what the alternative is, we don't know what our other possibilities are. And that it's very good to be able to do that exploratory and experiment with new possibilities from a position where we've got a stable work life.
Great advice. I guess we've covered the right out of college, early family now, and then I guess the next question is, how would you recommend approaching this job change after age 55? And you and I have discussed that that could be in itself several webinars in some of your specialty areas.
Of what
So
to do
I
when you're starting to think about the next stage, your second act, or retirement. Well, that's another great. There's a lot that's been written about that, and in fact, I'm doing a workshop on that for Encore on Friday, on thinking about your passion, and at that stage, and that's the thing that people have to really remember when they're in their 50s and 60s is that to really recognize that you're at a different stage in your life and what energized you and what made was important to you in your 30s and 40s is not what is important to us now. But yet we have a great opportunity to do something different, to do something more, to explore those things we've always wanted to do. Um, and when we're tied to what our outdated version of who we are and don't recognize that we're a different person, we're not happy. Uh, there's a great line in Suzanne Braun Levine's book to remember we are not who we are, only older. We're a completely different person. And so to that group of people, it's doing a lot of self-exploration as to what really matters to you now and what the possibilities are. I do a lot when I'm doing that workshop on a face-to-face basis. It's a lot of passion cards, of doing mind maps, and also creating a vision board and really starting to let ourselves dream. And it's interesting when people do vision boards, and we do as simple as looking through a pile of magazine pictures and saying, okay, put aside the ones that really intrigue you. And people find something about themselves that they usually didn't think about. They find that they're drawn to something that they hadn't even thought about that's in the back of their mind. So it's also very important to be open to those new ideas.
I think we'll have to schedule something following your presentation that you're doing on Friday to address this a bit more in detail because I think that's going to be a
There's
very
a lot. That's a
important topic
whole
for a lot of
different.
our.
That's a whole incremental. But it's a group I'm very passionate about being a baby boomer myself.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to exploring the ideas that we can do to help address those resources for our graduates, our fellow alumni. So, one quick point I'm going to make right now, if it's okay with you, I'm going to take a second here to open a survey in everyone's browser. Um, we're not going to conclude yet the webinar, but if you do take a minute or two just to complete this at some point in the next few minutes or just after we conclude, that'd be really helpful as this is one of our, this is the first career development webinar we're doing, so I welcome all the feedback we can get regarding the technology and timing and so forth. So please take a moment to fill that out. That'll be greatly appreciated. And while you're doing that, Kathy, I have a quick question. Who was the author that you mentioned with the YouTube job crafting video? Could you just
Oh, that's Amy
remind people?
Wierzniewski.
Great. Do you know how to spell that, or
Oh,
is it
it's on the last page
in the
of
resource?
it's on the
Perfect.
reference material.
There we go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Um, and
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 Michael, the one thing you and I have also talked about is really going back, particularly for the people just getting out of school, is to really know your strengths. And you and I have talked about doing some webinars on that too, to really do some things to explore what your strengths are, because only by really knowing your strengths can you really um, put yourself in a situation where um, your environment plays to your strengths. A lot of times we feel stuck or disengaged when it's actually we're in an environment that doesn't play to our strengths, that's in conflict with our strengths, that our role is asking us to do stuff that we're really not comfortable doing.
absolutely, I'm a big fan of Strengths Finder, Strengths Quest, the Gallup
Hmm.
assessment tool that they developed several years ago. Um, that I think I've used it personally. I know many people have probably on this call or on this webinar have participated in that assessment tool. It's still very relevant and it really helps you identify those strengths if you're doing it on your own. I like the idea that you recommended of asking your colleagues or friends to help you address your strengths because I think it builds out that team perception and how you each see each other and utilize each other's strengths to the advantage of making a great experience for everyone.
You'll find you have a personal brand and you didn't know you had a personal brand.
Exactly, exactly. So I think we have time for one more
I see some
question.
hands up, Michael, is there any way you can?
Oh, so the best if you have a hand up, please go ahead and type the question in the Q&A box. That's the easiest way for us to facilitate the Q&A. But I'll do my best. We have a few more minutes here, so if you do have there's a couple questions in the queue that are still remaining. So if you have one, I'll do my best to get to yours. But here's one. Can you speak a little bit about the notion of being a multi-passion individual. So let's say you have several passions.
Oh,
People
well,
who, for
I'm very
example, have
good at
arts.
that because I have a lot of passions. I'm an artist and I'm a leadership development coach, and I'm passionate about my community too. And in that case, you really need it. It's very important to figure out what's your passion now and what's your paramount passion. Because a lot of times, if we have too many passions going at the same time, we dilute our efforts and we end up not accomplishing anything. So it's some of it is planning and some of it is figuring out what is most important to you now. And it may be examining ways that you can uh, engage multiple passions at the same time. But I would
That's what
caution you
yeah, I was
that,
thinking, how can you fit the time?
yeah, I would caution you to try to don't dilute your efforts because you'll just be frustrated.
Good advice. Well, I think, I mean, what would you, as we just wrap up here the last minute or two, and Kathy, thank you again for all your time and preparing this workshop. I want to make sure that everyone that's joining us today is aware that next week, Daniel Schurz will be, alumnus of the class of '97, will be joining us for the second part of this series that Kathy and Daniel have been working hard to provide to our alumni. His topic is titled "Making Your Experiences Relevant," and Kathy mentioned a few sort of lead-ins to that topic. But if you haven't yet registered, I highly recommend going back online to our website, wmalumni.com, and going to the career section to register for the webinar on August the 3rd. I'll also be sending out follow-up information with that registration, as well as the worksheet and our link to today's recording and the survey reminder. So if you missed the link for some reason, we'll definitely make sure you have that. And then Kathy will be back on August the 17th for designing your plan, as she mentioned earlier. And then last, on August the 24th, we'll bring together Kathy and Daniel for a shared webinar discussing how to build and leverage your plan, build and leverage your network, so that we will make sure that you are aligning your connections appropriately to your passions and your plans and so forth. So I think everyone, after these 4 webinars, will be the key next steps for all of you and all of us to over the next month. So with that, what is the next thing that you want people to do following today's webinar? Obviously, the worksheet provides a lot of next steps. Where do we begin? All this is
Well,
amazing
I think the
advice.
key here is to be very self-aware and to really be introspective and think hard about the answers to some of these questions. How self-aware you are and how really reflective you are will help you get the most out of it. And we need to be really honest with ourselves. There's a lot of reference material that I attach to and reference to the worksheets, and you should find the ones that most intrigue you and tie best to your own personal questions, and do some reading as well. If you're interested in job crafting, then I recommend Amy Worsniewski's article and YouTube video, or also Richard Leder's books, Whistle While You Work, or The Power of Purpose. And then if you're interested in changing your career completely, I highly recommend Hermione Ibarra's book, Working Identity.
And on that note, I've reposted the worksheet so you can download that just to make sure that those that missed it earlier on, as well as a survey if you missed that link. And thank you so much, Kathy. Really appreciate you taking the time this afternoon. And we look forward to seeing you in a few weeks on the 17th. And Daniel, we look forward to your participation next week, and everyone else joining us is hopefully
And,
live presentation.
and if anybody has a question, my email is kathy@kdurdinconsulting.com.
Great. Go Tribe. Thanks so much, Kathy. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.